Okay, if we all could get started, please. Thank you all for being here. Scott Bowley, your Dean of the College of Business. Wonderful day to be getting together. Beautiful outside. We could almost have an outdoor celebration today, but maybe in another week or two. Wonderful to have everyone here. This is a program supported by the Menard family. This is our first in-person Menard speaker series that we've had. We've had everyone from Arthur Brooks to Alice Marie Johnson to many other thought leaders. Everything has been remote because of COVID. And prior to COVID, about 2 years ago, we had a commitment from our guest today to attend, and he was determined to get to North Dakota 2 years ago. It was the very last cancellation we made. So if you remember March of 2020, when the world's shutting down, we were holding out hope that we could do this, and it was getting to be March 5th, March 10th, and Dr. Smith was saying, I think I can still come, and the event was like March 25th. And if you remember, March 17th or so was when the entire world just froze up. And maybe March 20th, he said, I don't think I'm going to be able to make that trip. But he and his wife, Candace, said, we want to come to Fargo and come see what you're doing at NDSU. And they're here 2 years later, and we're delighted to have them as our inaugural Menard speaker in person event today. This is all made possible by the Challey Institute. There's about 12 prominent donors who have supported the Challey Institute to the tune of $35 million. That allows us to bring in nationally prominent thought leaders, Nobel Prize winners, and people just engaging students and the community with the ideas of economics and a free society. So it's an honor to have you here, Vernon, and really looking forward to the conversation. One just housekeeping item, if you all could just please make sure your cell phones are silent. There will be questions about 35 or 40 minutes into this. We'll go to Q&A. There's a microphone. If you could wait for that, that would be great. We have about 200 people on Zoom watching and tuning in as well. So they can't hear us unless we wait for the microphone. So please try to do that. Introduce yourself as well. It'd be great for Dr. Smith to learn who you all are as you ask questions. So about 10, 12 questions from me, and then hopefully a lively Q&A, both from you all, and then if anyone wants to ask us questions from Zoom too. So thank you all for being here. And without further delay, just a quick bio on Dr. Vernon Smith. So Vernon L. Smith, the George L. Argyros Chair in Finance and Economics and President International Foundation for Research in Experimental Economics. Vernon is a Ph.D. and was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Science in 2002 for his groundbreaking work in experimental economics. Dr. Smith has joint appointments with the Argyros School of Business and Economics and the Fowler School of Law at Chapman University. He is part of a team that has created and will run the new Economic Science Institute at Chapman as well. Throughout his career, he has authored and co-authored more than 350 articles and books on capital theory, finance, natural resource economics, and experimental economics. Professor Smith is a fellow of the Econometric Society and the American Association for the Academy of Science. Purdue University awarded him an honorary doctorate of management degree in 1989. He was elected member of the National Academy of Science in 1995. In 1996, he received Caltech's Distinguished Alumni Award. He became Kansan, he's from Kansas, Kansan of the Year in 2002, received a Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Kansas in 2011, and in 2014, an honorary doctorate of science degree from KU. He has served on numerous editorial and editorial advisory boards and as president of several national economic associations. He's also served as a consultant on the liberalization of electric power in Australia and New Zealand, and has participated in numerous private and public discussions of energy privatization and liberalization in the United States. In 1997, he served as a Blue Ribbon panel member of the North American Electric Reliability Council. Vernon, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for making this a priority, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Smith to Fargo.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Great.
It's been 12 years. You look great.
Well, thank you. Yes. And
let's start there. Last night we had an etiquette dinner. Vernon's wife, Candace Smith, is here as well. She's an etiquette coach and taught 50 of our students and the Dean of Business a little bit about etiquette last night. Little did I know the left hand's really important in actually eating, kind of a key component as opposed to just like sawing your food. So thank you for being here last night and teaching our students a thing or two about etiquette and the importance of etiquette in life, Candace. Let's start with you being here. Last night we had a picture of our group at the etiquette dinner. Someone afterwards said, thank God for people like Vernon and Candace who make it a point to visit universities like NDSU. You all could just be, you dance, you both dance. You could be dancing away in retirement and doing country line dancing. And instead you're still out on the road visiting places like NDSU. Why are you still doing that?
Well, we still have the energy for it, and it's really fun.
Yeah.
You know, we enjoy and interesting. We had a preview of what to expect by the van driver who brought us from the airport to the hotel. Candace asked him, what's it like being here? And he says, the main thing is the people. But we thought that was great. And indeed, it is. It's the people.
It's a good place.
So,
and you've been here before to
to
North Dakota.
Yes, a long time ago, the summer of 1946, just passing through.
Right.
I joined a young people's group in Minneapolis. And as you might guess, this was a young people's socialist group. You know, young people everywhere, you know, are enamored by socialism. And indeed, I grew up in that environment. So it was a young people's socialist group. Afterwards, I linked up with another visitor there, and we drove a Model A rumble seat Ford from Minneapolis through Fargo, Bismarck. And of course, the impressive thing about driving toward Bismarck is the Capitol building starts to appear, just a tip on the horizon, and then grows. And so while we watched that grow out of the middle of nowhere, and then went up through Portal to northern Saskatchewan, we worked on a lumber mill that summer.
That's great.
So
you know, and we were talking about this last night, that one of our most prominent alumni is a gentleman who grew up 60 miles up the road in Buxton, North Dakota, Mansur Olson. And we've tried to frame some of our programming in the College of Business, the Challey Institute, around themes that Mansur was tackling. And we talked last night about Olson's legacy and whether or not he might have won a Nobel Prize had he not died so young. And you knew him.
Oh, yes. Mansur made important contributions and was really quite well known. All economists knew about Mansur's work. I knew him primarily at the University of Maryland. And moreover, he was a wonderful person, a wonderful guy. And no, his work was, you know, all students all read it. You know, we assigned it in graduate classes, certainly. And so he was a great loss.
It was an interesting day for me. I drove up to Buxton and I was trying to find his homestead. So I went into a small shop and I said, I'm looking for the Olson homestead. And the woman who was helping me said, well, I'm related to him. I can drive you out there and show you where it is. And then his grave was right near the homestead at a very small church. So Mansur Olson, probably one of the most prominent graduates of NDSU ever, and just up the road from here. Let's turn to your Nobel Prize. I was at George Mason in 2002 when you got the call that morning that you were a Nobel Prize winner. How long did you know before 2002 that you might get that call? And what was it like the day that you got it?
Well, I didn't really know beforehand at all. There was speculation, but I wasn't unique in that regard. There was speculation about others. I mean, for example, maybe Mansur. And so my friends thought it was, I think, more likely than I did, because you get, there's no advance warning. And there's always several possible candidates, and that are narrowed down. And you know, the economics committee makes its decision and then immediately goes to the Swedish National Academy of Science and makes their presentation. The Academy votes up or down then, and then when it's, I mean, if it's up, and I don't, nobody knows what sort of batting average there is. As soon as the vote occurs, the committee comes right out and they meet the press. So there's no possibility of leaks. The fuse is too short. So that was, you know. So I'm at George Mason University. I'm in my office, and I'm a morning person, not a night person. So I usually am in my office at 6 o'clock or certainly by 7. And the phone rang at 8. I was working on a paper. The phone rang at 8 in the morning, and when I hung up, I knew who was going to be publishing the paper I was writing. They would. So because that's would be what I would talk about. I usually always talk about whatever I'm now working on. And so the chairman of the economics committee was on the phone, and he introduced himself and the topic and read the citation, and he said that I'm here on a speakerphone with the committee. He said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Relieved. My friends have been predicting this for years, and I have felt as though I've let them down." So I no longer felt that way.
Yeah.
And so that, and then the rest of the day was pretty much a blur.
Right. Right. It's been 20 years. What has it been like just having that title of Nobel Prize winner? You know, we've promoted, this is the first Nobel Prize winner in Richard H. Berry Hall today. And, you know, everywhere you go, you have that status. And some assumption that you have a corner on truth or something as well.
Well, the main change in your life in my life, was I already was speaking a lot, traveling and speaking a lot. And the big difference was I had to turn down a good many of the invitations because I couldn't do them all. Before that, I did them all. And the other thing that's kind of you're not really ready for is you're expected to be an expert on anything and everything. And I remember once it was a media group, and someone asked me something, and I don't remember what it was, but it was something about some current event. And I said, well, I didn't know any more about that than somebody out in the street. And the guy said, well, yeah, but we want to know what you think anyway. So there you are. You can't get rid of them.
I heard you on our local radio yesterday. Thank you for going on local radio. And you sounded coherent about current events and what's happening in the state of North Dakota. You were asked about something related to energy and sounded like you'd fit in well in this state in terms of your answer, you know?
Well, he happened to ask me something I knew something about.
There you go, yeah. Yeah. You won the Nobel for your work in experimental economics. And can you tell our audience a little bit about why your contributions in that field were revolutionary and just changed the way we do economics today?
Well, no one expected the results that I got. And I say we because not too long after others unbelievingly replicated the experiments and found, yes, you know, it works. And the way I would describe it is that the experiments showed that markets worked. What failed dismally was the theory, because in those days, and let me just briefly, my first experiment was in a classroom. And there was an introductory principles class. I'm at Purdue University. It's January 1956. I have 22 students in the room. It's the first day of class, so they've read nothing. And we've had no discussion of economics. So presumably they know nothing about economics. And so there's 22. I made 11 of them buyers and 11 of them sellers. This is just arbitrary, you know, it could be any mix. I made 11 buyers and 11 sellers. And I had some 3 by 5 cards I'd cut into each card into 4 pieces. And the yellow cards, I wrote the value. The yellow cards were the buyers, and for each buyer, I wrote the value to that person of an item that he might be able to buy in the market. And the sellers, I wrote down their cost. Then and they might make a sale. Well, buyers earned the difference between the value they were given and the price they got in the market. So everybody's motivated to buy cheap. And the sellers got the difference between the price at which they would sell a unit and their costs. And they're motivated to sell high. And what I wasn't aware of at the time was that is really very close to Adam Smith's description of what motivates a market in Chapter 7 of The Wealth of Nations. He says every buyer comes to market with a reservation price, every seller with a reservation cost. Okay. And then the market involves haggling and bargaining among these people. Well, that's more recent in my learning because I've been, gotten really very interested in Smith's work. So we had people had to know how to trade. So I said, we'll do an oral outcry auction. Any buyer can announce a bid. Any seller can announce an asking price. And buyer bids have to get higher. I mean, you have to beat the bid that's out there if you're a buyer. And if you're a seller, you have to do better, offer a lower asking price to beat the person that's there. And then contracts occurred by buyers either accepting the existing ask that's out there or a seller accepting a buyer's bid. So it's a two-sided auction. And of course, unknown to the subjects, since each person only knew their own value and cost, if you arrayed the values of the buyers from highest to lowest, and it fell in 25-cent increments, just like this. And the supply curve rose in 25 cents. So there was the supply and demand. And now, when we teach and we write supply and demand schedules, if we follow Marshall, we put price, P, on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal. That's wrong. There aren't any prices. There's only the values and the costs. Everybody makes that mistake. I made it. If you look at my first papers, I got price on the vertical axis because but there aren't any prices there. There's just values and costs. Because the buyers and sellers haven't discovered any prices yet, you see. And in the oral outcry auction, you start to get bids and asks accepted. Those are the prices, and they're finding them. See, so you plot the sequence of those prices over here, and well, it converged very quickly. I did about I don't know, 8 or 9 replications. I mean, meaning we trade for a period, the market closes, then everybody has their values and costs refreshed. So it's like Monday. and there's a flow of goods onto the market and then off because buyers are consuming them. And then it's Tuesday and then there's another day. Think of it that way. So there's a flow onto the market and then it disappears into households and into consumption. Think of that. Well, this converged very quickly. By the third period, is very close to the. And see, in that day, no one would have believed that a bunch of sophomores can walk into a room, you give them those values and costs, they don't know any economics, they haven't seen or very likely not participated in an auction like that before. Although, you know, it's amazing. People just get it right away. We're just born traders. Everybody is. And they pick it up. I didn't know that at the time, but I gradually learned that was never a problem. People pick up on those rules very quickly. It's very natural. And they found the equilibrium. Well, no one would believe that because we had stories. We had narratives. One of the narratives was you had to have a very large number of buyers and sellers, a sea of buyers and sellers, you see. Why? Because you wanted everyone to be a price taker. No one would have any power in the market, was the idea. Well, here we've got 11 buyers and 11 sellers, and everybody is as much a price maker as a taker because it's a two-sided auction. So, you know, none of the things that we believe were present in that experiment. And they found it. Well, you see, it seemed, well, the first question was whether you could believe these results. Well, I didn't think you could. And I thought, well, perhaps the thing that was wrong with the experiment, it had too much symmetry. And it was just an accident of that symmetry that I was getting this result. So I did very asymmetric cases, kind of like this. They all convert, they all went. So it was very clear that I was dealing here with the law of nature. And we didn't have any way of really understanding it in those days. So that got me hooked. And I did more experiments and published the first 12 to 14 of them in that first paper in 1962.
So in 62, you're literally handing out paper cards and, you know, like trying to work this all out in kind of a very basic fashion. Fast forward to 2002, you have labs and major grants and laptops in the labs, and you subsidized my rent many months as a grad student because you were paying students to participate in experiments.
Yes.
So thank you for that. You actually, Washington, D.C. was very expensive in 2002. But I got to be a lab rat in your labs, and it was wonderful because I was getting paid to trade. And you think about that advancement over 40 years, and the technological advancement's pretty amazing. But what I'm interested in as a dean is the hoops you had to jump through to be able to pay students to trade, and for people to be on board with the idea that you could make money. Like you had to have it set up so that you could make money and be incentivized to truly participate in the experiment. What was it like getting your dean or your president to be on board with, I'm going to pay students and I need you to be okay with it?
Well, of course, I didn't ask. I mean,
there you go.
Why would you? I mean, if you ask, the answer may be no.
Right.
So you just do it.
Gotcha.
And I had. Well, I was using my own money at the very beginning, and then let's see, that paper was published in 62. In 1962, I also got my first grant from the National Science Foundation, and it was $25,000, which was actually quite a lot in those days. And I had, you know, my proposal was welcome. And although it's interesting, I was told by the person who headed the division the social science division, that the only reason why they were able to support me is that they paid no attention to referee reports from people that didn't know, that just dismissed it as, this is not what economists do. And so they only really listened to the ones that took it seriously, and those tended to be maybe a minority. Nevertheless, were very favorable. So I got, was getting positive feedback already by 62. Of course, I was talking about it. I remember Northwestern University. There was a number of places before Chicago. Chicago. I got George Stigler invited me to come and do a presentation at Chicago in it would have been 1957, and so on. In Carnegie Tech, you see Herb Simon was there, and other people that who were interested in this approach. You see, so there really was interest, even if it wasn't part of nearly part of mainstream economics. In fact, the conventional wisdom and economics was that what made economics kind of different than the sciences was that you couldn't do experiments. And if you didn't believe that, just all you had to do was read Paul Samuelson's textbook, and he told you that that was the case. So, so much for the facts. And of course, the reason why wasn't that you couldn't do experiments. It's just that nobody tried, and no one was sure how to do it. Well, Ed Chamberlain, you see, had pioneered an experiment that was published by the JPE, a bunch of them at Harvard, and he brought in this notion of implementing the Marshall's idea of a maximum willingness to pay with a value, and minimum willingness to accept on the seller side. So that was in his paper, but his experiment, the subjects just mingled, just wrote, and buyer and a seller they'd bump into each other and they'd try to make a bargain. And if the buyer's value was greater than the cost, they had a pretty good chance of reaching a bargain. If they weren't, well, there was no chance, and because they couldn't both make money. So you see, the very idea of gains from trade at the root of a market is right there in that experiment, just as it is in Chapter 7 of The Wealth of Nations. So anyway, that changed the way I thought about economics, and gradually it changed the way other people, disbelievers, if you don't believe it, then just try it. That's the neat thing about it. Whereas a lot of other work that's done in economics is hard to replicate, and quite as precise and with such precision as we can here. So that really, got us going.
So one of my favorite contributions that you've made is making us think about bargaining with two people and trust in ultimatum games, essentially. And someone says, we can split a dollar bill any which way. I'm going to split it. Theory says you should split it 99 cents for me. You take a penny, and you're better off because you'll still take that penny. But you've tested this over and over with actual people, all kinds of different types of people, untrustworthy, trustworthy.
People routinely reject you. They'll take nothing if you've offered them that little.
Yeah. And what is the kind of equilibrium that you found in?
Well, in the trust games that we've done, let's see, the first player, it's a two-move game. The first player just passes. I mean, instead of passing to the person, they opt out and they each get $12. If player one passes to player two, the $24 becomes $48. And the idea there is that there's two people. If a person passes, there's some synergies there. So there's gains to the union beyond what just separate individuals. And so it becomes 48. And let's see, it's if a person moves right, they get the division is, I think, $18 and $30 would be the thing. Or two can in one version they could take all the money.
Right.
Our first version, they could take all the money. The payouts weren't quite that large. Then we made it that the first person only got $4 and the other person get the rest, I guess the $44. Well, so it's clearly in the person two's interest to play down and to not play right. And the first person realizing this should never pass to him. So that the equilibrium of the game is to not pass. Well, over 50%, about 55% of player ones, and we first, of course, do it with undergraduates. We've done that experiment broadly with all kinds of groups, and it holds up really well. A little over half will pass. And of the player twos, 2/3 of them will play right, and only 1/3 of them defect.
So this means trust is hardwired, or what is the bottom line of that much cooperation?
Well, I think the best explanation of that is in a proposition by Adam Smith in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, and that was published over 200 years ago, 1759. We call it his Beneficence Proposition 1. He doesn't number it, but we do. And the proposition says that actions of a beneficent tendency that are properly motivated, and he later discusses, and what that means is it's intentional. I intended to do you something good for you. And you see, in that game, you don't have to move to person number two. Anyone who does it is deliberately choosing to do that rather than opt out. So Adam Smith says, actions of a beneficent tendency that are properly motivated deserve, he actually uses a stronger word, require reward because of the gratitude the person feels. Well, now there's a model. It says you do something for me you didn't have to do. I feel gratitude. And it isn't just you and me. Adam Smith also makes it clear that any neighbors that are watching agree that this deserves reward. And in fact, it's kind of incumbent on you to reward. So I have a parable that I tell. I'm leaving for office. It's Monday. I'm heading for the office. And Monday is trash pickup day. So before I leave for the office, I put my trash out at curbside. I come home in the evening and I forget to bring it in. Well, Monday night, early Tuesday morning, the street sweeper comes through. And if there's any barrels still out there, you get a citation. My neighbor comes home, brings hers in. She sees that I didn't bring mine in, so she brings it in for me. Well, that's Monday. The following Saturday, I'm picking avocados off of my 2 trees in the backyard, and I have a sack, and I pick some extra ones for her. I take them over. She's not home, but I leave them on the doorstep. That's what neighbors do, you see, and that's exactly what Adam Smith's talking about. And it's just a powerful proposition. It's stated in abstract form, and it's a general rule, but it has all kinds of context-specific applications, you see. And I would say it's amazing how much mileage you can get out of that. So so that explains that. But he has another proposition on we call it Beneficence Proposition 2. And it says that failure to be beneficent. His words is want of beneficence, meaning you got an opportunity, but you don't exercise it. It says want of beneficence does no real positive evil. And he says that's not something that people would consider to be punishable. And you think about it logically, he's looking, you've got a set of valuable things that might be done, you see, that are benefits. Where's the 0 point? Is the 0 point in that set, or at 0 is all of a sudden something else happened? And he's saying it's in the set, you see, from a logical point of view. And it's in the set. Well, indeed, you do that experiment, and that means just modifying the original game. So if the person was right, instead of it ending at 12-12, it goes to person 2. And that person chooses 12-12, or if that person is upset at a small cost, the payoff drops to $10, you can punish that person with a $10 outcome. And so we do that experiment, and no one exercises that option. Actually, there's something that's not clear from Adam Smith, because it's not part of that proposition. But it's interesting that more people now move right. That now you change a node in a game, and it changes how people read it, how they read each other, and so there's all kinds of interesting things you see are happening here, and that kind of invite further exploration.
So the parable in Fargo, North Dakota involves snow removal in the wintertime. So my neighbor will shovel for me, or otherwise my mailman can't get to the house. So there's a lot of tit for tat back and forth on that front.
And by the way, you see, Smith is not assuming, he's still assuming that everyone is strictly self-interested in his model. We're not doing this. And in fact, think of the proposition. It says that actions of a beneficent tendency. Well, you can't implement that proposition unless everyone understands what a benefit is. Well, how do you understand what a benefit is? Somebody gets more of something. So implicitly, everybody's assuming that there's common knowledge of self-interest. You see, it's not about everybody is self-interested. Otherwise, you don't know what a benefit or a hurt is. But the predictions of behavior are coming from rules, you see. And as Smith says, we are all strictly self-interested, but you can't look your neighbor in the face and avow that all your decisions are going to be on your self-interest. And that's the key. So he says we humble the arrogance of our self-interest to bring it down to what other people will go along with. He uses the phrase go along with with 41 times if you do search. In other words, you're getting it every few pages. So it's the idea, what will people go along with? So that's his model of why we are social.
Yeah.
See, and if people aren't all self-interested, then they can't read what benefit and cost are. So the model requires people to be self-interested, but not to act always self-interested. And you see, that distinction is very important, and it's not part of a modern thinking in economics. See, in economics, A is chosen over B if and only if the utility of A is greater than the utility of B. Well, Smith would say, well, of course, but what are you going to do with that? I mean, where are you going to go with that? You see, he wants to add, he embeds these decisions in a process of in people's relationships, you see. And then out of that, well, yeah, you can get utility kind of things, but that's not the way to understand what's going on. So that's why this guy who wrote over 200 years ago is fresh and relevant today. Yeah. And we can learn from him.
And you're wearing a tie. That's a dedication to him,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, there's
not
Adam
bad.
Smith.
That's Adam Smith on his tie. So I want to shift gears a little bit and treat you like the Nobel that you are and ask you questions that aren't related to economic theory here, but that are grounded in experiences you've had. First, just a quick plug. I've got your 2009 memoir here. It's an excellent memoir that you didn't have any kind of editor massage and make real pretty. And it's Vernon qua Vernon in terms of the field. There's a hamburger recipe in it. There's a discussion of whether soda is better in the can or poured into a glass. And it's really just excellent. Signed, this copy is signed. I might need you to sign it a second time or something,
okay.
But it's really great. A few questions before we get to the audience. Higher ed, you've been in the higher ed industry your entire career. It's gotten crazier over time in a lot of different ways, and free speech in particular is something that is a front and center issue on campuses. NDSU is actually pretty spectacular on this front. It's a great place to have a Challey Institute and bring in a Nobel Laureate and, to bring in a lot of diversity of ideas and not worry about being canceled. But it's happening around the country that you have to have a certain point of view or you're not welcome. And I'm wondering, you've been in it 60 plus years. What are your observations on this current moment in higher ed?
Well, I think it's kind of business as usual. It's not the first time this sort of thing has happened. Politically, for example, we've gone through a period where a lot of people were upset by Donald Trump, and all kinds of people liked him. There were people on both sides. Well, if you go back to the 30s, Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, for the first, that was his first time he won the Democratic nomination. Well, 5 states were delivered for him by Huey Long, governor of Louisiana, who easily out-trumps Trump on anything. There was all kinds of corruption in Louisiana, but a lot of the corruption led to better roads because he was raising money and building roads. People loved him. And did he hide the corruption? No, he bragged about it. And people ate it up. They loved him. But things got a little difficult for Roosevelt in 1935 because Huey Long felt that Franklin Roosevelt's move to do more for the poor, the bottom end, wasn't near strong enough. So Huey Long took a stronger position. We got to do more for and his motto was every man a king. And he had a very popular base. There was something like 30,000 clubs in the United States that, because Huey Long wanted to greatly increase retirement benefits and other things, and there were clubs supporting that. And so if you go back, and of course, 1860 to 1870, we had a civil war. I mean, we've been through a lot of really difficult times, but we survive it, and that makes me an optimist. I think we'll survive this. And because these populist things, the thing is, there's nothing driving them from the bottom. You see, they're our free American system is driven by people who are, first of all, protected from government. What's the Constitution, the Bill of Rights all about? Who are you being protected from? The government. You see, the government, the Congress shall make no law that will interfere with freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right of free assembly. All of these rights, our Constitution protects us from the government. Well, that's because that's where the threat is. The threat was. And if you want a government that will protect you from injury by your neighbor or a foreigner, you need first have a government that's you're protected from. So all constitutions, that's the first thing you do. And then if you get that right, then you got a chance, you see, on everything else. And that's, and you know, we've had an incredible long run, you see, and the founders were very much aware of all of these issues. There were a bunch of very smart guys and had their a good on the ground sense, you see. They had hoped to avoid factions. Politics, which of course is pretty hard to do. They almost from the beginning we had factions. But they also realized that checks and balances and so forth might be able to keep that under control. So I think that, you know, it's you and me and all third parties that make it work. And Americans have a sense of what's right, whatever the issue is, and a lot of respect for doing the right thing. And so, and the fact that's coming from the bottom means that I think even though there's periods of challenges, we'll go back to that.
Two more questions. You were involved in the Copenhagen Consensus back in the early 2000s, looking at the threat of global warming relative to a number of other global risks. And if I remember correctly, global warming wasn't the number one threat. There were a lot of other things that are of much greater concern. And the approach taken was kind of a cost-benefit analysis, yes, where the benefits to addressing issue A are far greater than global warming, which is down here. Can you tell us about that project a little bit?
Sort of the idea was to do kind of benefits versus cost comparisons and let that sift out kind of what seems to be the right thing to do, because there's lots of stuff you can do. but you don't have, but we're also have limited resources. So how you're gonna, that was the exercise. And there was a group of us, it was, originally it was, let's see, Bob Fogel, an economic historian, Doug North, economic historian, Tom Schelling, who was kind of a on-the-ground game theory kind of guy. And in fact, he was at Maryland, right? Mansur Olson's place. Tom Schelling, let's see, Nancy Stokey from the University of Chicago. And I was on, and that was kind of the original group. That's changed. But then we had more than one meeting, and we were doing these exercises. And we listened to position papers in each of these areas, and then 2 comment papers. So there were 3, and they were the experts, not us. We're just the people who are going to try to put this all together. And so we're learning from them. And there would be always one on the environment and a couple of others. And then things on, like, for example, education programs for girls in India, Africa, China, remote areas. There would be topics like this, and where that were really interesting, because these papers, you realized how much money was being left on the table, because girls everywhere were not getting the sort of education, you see, that that boys were getting, even in these areas that had very little resources. And then there were papers on, nutrition problems of children around the world. For example, most of the salt consumed in the world is not iodized, and people have all kinds, the iodine deficiencies create all kinds of problems. And then other nutrition problems with children that create long-term problems because they don't properly develop and grow. There's the problem of vaccinating children in remote areas where you don't have clinics. All of these kind of things, we'd have papers on aspects of this. Well, you start to malaria, tuberculosis, AIDS at one point. You see, when we were first meeting people, there was nothing for AIDS, was just rampant. So it was pretty easy to find things better than the environment. And in terms of getting your bang for your buck, and because reducing carbon emissions is a really major. The thing but what we did learn, though, that was important was research on energy efficiency, because a breakthrough in that might make a big difference in the environment, you see. But otherwise, to try to just brute force carbon reductions, you're talking about undeveloped countries that where poverty is being reduced. Why? Because they've got low-cost energy, and they're developing, you see, and that's creating wealth, and they're reducing poverty. So in the worldwide reduction of poverty is very much connected with energy, you see. So this is why we tended to rate it low, but we typically gave good marks for increased research on energy efficiency. Yeah. And there's a question of how to do that and whether it'll be done right. You know, there's a lot of issues of implementation, but that's the reason. It wasn't because we didn't care about the environment, but it just was not, it just made no sense.
You cared about a lot of other things.
Yeah,
yeah,
compared with these other things, you see.
So last question, your book is very public about this, and you've been outspoken about your Asperger's and what that has meant for your career in terms of just managing workflow. It's made some things easier, some things more difficult. Just wondering if you're willing to talk about that a little bit in terms of challenges it's created.
Refer to that I don't seem to be there. Well, I'm preoccupied. My mind's on something else. That's usually what it is. And there's, that's not unusual among a lot of people. There is, in fact, Adam Smith, one of his contemporaries, and I have the statement. Well, let's see, it's contemporary by the name of Alexander Carlyle. He knew a lot of figures in 18th century Scotland, and he's commenting on a lot of them. And he says, and I'm almost paraphrasing, quoting, he says, Adam Smith was the most absent man in companies that he had ever met. He says, in a group, if you awakened him from his reveries and asked him to give attention to the topic at hand, he would tell you all he knew about it. And you had the impression you got harangued. So that was a contemporary, to say. And of course, Einstein was also someone who was often preoccupied. So it's not necessarily a bad habit.
No, you've done pretty well, I think. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to Adam Smith right now, in fact. I have more questions. I want to give students and the audience a chance to ask questions, though. This is your chance to ask a Nobel laureate any question on your mind. And we have about a half hour for Q&A. If there's anyone on Zoom, we're happy to coordinate those questions too. Any first question? And students, feel free to come up afterwards and get a picture too. It's not every day.
Just raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you.
My name is Zenas Baer. In 1987, I visited Beijing, China, at a conference with Ed Meese on trade, investment, and economic law. I cut out from the Great Hall of the People from the conference and went out into the community. And I ran into this local who took me to his house, and he described the dreams of 3 billion Chinese. And they were to live at the level of consumption that we in America are living. Is there any work done on the economic side as to how long our Earth could sustain that type of exploitation with additional 3 or 5 billion people consuming at our level?
Well, you would also have unleash billions of possibilities for innovation and out of the box thinking. That's an important thing to keep in mind, because when you release human ingenuity, it's not just to produce more stuff, but also can everybody wants to try to do better and do it for less. That means doing it for less means savings, you'd say, saving on it. So, I think that human element needs to be balanced against, what looks like would be an overwhelming of resources. And if you look at the long term inflation adjusted price of commodities, they keep getting lower. I mean, it isn't, there aren't temporary, look, gasoline has all of a sudden soared, but the long-term trend, you see, has been, inflation adjusted, has been down, and the same thing for other mineral resources and everything. And you see, that is completely inconsistent with that story. And so that story, people that are narrating need to come to terms, and they have to explain for us why it is, if that's true, that these prices keep getting lower. Because if you're using more, it drives up prices, right? But the prices are going down. And that is what that is telling you, is that we're getting more and more out of less. So
So you're not too worried about overpopulation or sustainability?
well, and I'm also worried about whether you would do more harm than good if you tried to do it differently.
Gotcha.
You see, you got to ask how you're going to reduce the population, how you're going to actually implement these. And then, well, all kinds of people have ideas for doing that, and none of them with the resources to bring it about. So that means governments or world organizations would have to do it, and you know, they just the information problem is overwhelming as to how to do that, and that information is solved in markets by individuals that are dispersed, and everybody knows something, and that knowledge is all distributed. And it's just like in my experiment, each person had only knowledge of his own situation, knew nothing of the others, but that didn't keep the group from operating in a way which benefited everyone. And you see, that's not obvious and to everyone, and that's the reason why we get the stories about how can we survive with population growing. Well, but it's against not something that's fixed because of this tendency to always get more out of less. So that's would be my answer.
Got it. Other questions?
Hello, I'm Joy Dolan. I am a student here at North Dakota State University. So what would be your greatest piece of advice for young people, or a quote that has kind of stuck with you over the years?
Well, don't put action up front. Put learning and thinking, because, you know, I grew up in a socialist family, and it just made a lot of sense to me, even at age 19. But I look back and I realized that I knew almost nothing when I was 19. And that's not what I thought at the time, of course. And you have to, it's important to get a better understanding of how things work. And because the things work because of all kinds of processes that are not visible. You see, and they work in neighborhoods as well as in markets, and information is always very distributed. It is right in my neighborhood, you see, although there's a lot of people in the local area have a lot of common knowledge, and that's just it just does miracles, you know. And we are really, God must favor us a lot. Adam Smith talks about rules and order in neighborhoods in one book and in economy in the other. But he says it's the great author of nature that is the source of all these rules. But he says that doesn't, in effect, he says that doesn't help you and I understand how these things work. So he doesn't pursue that route because it doesn't lead to any kind of understanding of how people on the ground kind of learn to do the right thing, even though he thinks religion is very important. And his evidence is, he says, the earliest and most primitive religions that are just very superstition driven had idols of good and evil, and they were models for people, the idols of good and evil. So Smith believed that religion and religious belief was very important as an underlying thing. That's, of course, become more secularized, and we don't know what kind of the long-term effect of that will be. But we've become pretty secular in America, but we, I think, still have a good sense of what's right, and ways of finding out how to do things and kind of in the right way, so that we go along with each other in that process.
I am Odam here, and I'm a faculty of finance here. I'm also an economist by training. Thank you for being here. So you talk about neighbor helping neighbor, even we are all, each individual care about self-interest, but we still help we still help our neighbor because that is the best thing we do. But when it comes to the global scale, do you also optimistic that countries can come together and helping each other to combat a global issue like climate change, reducing poverty and stuff like that, just like at the individual level?
It's the people in the world that need to come together to solve those things. And I think they are doing it. And they're doing it well, for one thing, global trade has just keeps growing, and more specialization in remote regions where we find that, and everybody brings to that table a little bit of knowledge, and it's the aggregation of that knowledge that goes on in trading markets that accounts for our prosperity and worldwide reduction in poverty. And in many ways, the outlook is very good now in terms of world production of food and getting it to the remote areas and the people that are in need. But the way to satisfy their needs is not by transfers, but by bringing them into the system and giving them more opportunity and education. And then you mentioned, we talked about the Copenhagen Consensus and better systems of education for girls worldwide was very clearly one of the things that we rated quite high, because there was so much value there being just dissipated and left on the table. So that to be part of that system requires some increase in their skills, their educational accomplishment. Not necessarily anything like I mean, it doesn't have to be large to be very, nevertheless, very making an important contribution. So I think that's the answer. I don't think it's the problem is to keep the governments from in some sense neutralizing that or keeping it from happening.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Corey Broder. I was one of the lucky few to get your wife's etiquette coaching last night, but I didn't get the chance to ask you, what really sparked your passion for economics?
Well, I was at Caltech and I'd been studying physics and chemistry and I by the time I was a senior, though, I was less clear than I wanted to stay in that field, and I had it was a great experience there. It isn't. If I'd do all over again, I wouldn't have changed anything. You know, when you get to have Linus Pauling for freshman chemistry, a guy who's not only a great scientist and a very creative thinker, but a great teacher. At Caltech, there's a tradition at the end of the semester, you applaud your instructors on the last day. Linus Pauling, I saw him got standing ovations. During the semester, they would be so good. And there was a guy in math that taught calculus, Bonenblast. We called him Boney. Bonenblast. And he was very articulate. So it was a great experience. But I kind of wanted, I thought I was looking for something else. Well, I took as a senior in Caltech was on the quarter system, which is about 10 or 11 weeks. As a senior, I took a course in Principles of Economics. That was a 1-quarter course. And I had no idea that any such thing existed. And I was really intrigued by that. And in fact, I remember going to the Caltech library and I thought I'll find out a little bit what people do in economics. And I picked up an issue of the Quarterly Journal of Economics. And there was an article in there about engineering production functions. I found a book called The Foundations of Economic Analysis by Paul Samuelson. I looked through that and I said, this is just physics. And then also I stumbled upon Human Action by Mises. And I realized it was not, it was a pretty big field. And I didn't recognize much of it that was in that book. But anyway, so I thought, I think I'm interested in economics. So I'll go back to Kansas where the tuition is low and go to the University of Kansas and get a master's degree in economics. And that was my plan. And people have often asked me questions about how far ahead I plan. Not very far. If you knew what to do next, you don't have to plan beyond that. And somehow I always figured out from where I was what to do next, and then in a sequence of small steps. So KU turned out to be terrific, really exactly the right for me. And I decided to stay in economics, so then I went to Harvard, got a Ph.D., and then Purdue was my first appointment. And that's where experimental economics got, became intrigued by that. And I was and you know, I was attracted to academia because I was free to do kind of what I wanted to. And I mean, there's lots of people around to tell you what you ought to do. Because that's just at least as frequent in academia as it is anywhere else, but you don't have to do it.
Probably time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Mike Jones, graduate quite some time ago in economics. You spent your life in academia, sir. Did you hear a lot about rising tuition rates and burgeoning student loan debt? Do you think that's a problem? And do you have a recommendation on how that can be addressed?
Well, yes. I mean, the econometricians discovered that education level was a signal of worth in the market. And the data was all showing that people with more education got better jobs and earned more. So what created this loan program to get more people into education. And guess what? They came out of the schools and they couldn't find work. So no, I believe that higher education, I think it's not for everybody. And, you know, my mother and father had 8th grade educations, but they were interested in ideas and reading and books. You know, my father had a set of the Harvard classics. And I remember growing up, and those to me, the books represented knowledge, and you could find out things in those books. And then libraries were even bigger stores of knowledge. So I had this respect, and my parents did, and so it was always expected that I would, you know, go to college, even though I was the only one in my family. Well, it's not quite true. I had a great uncle who injured his leg on a farm gate as a child, and so he wasn't of much use on the farm, so he got an education. and went to University of Kansas, got a law degree and practiced law in Cherryville, Kansas. He was our only intellectual. And but so anyway, I had that thirst for knowledge, and my parents did, you see. And they were lifelong learners. Well, that's, you know, that's the best lesson anyone can learn. And they, you know, they lived satisfying and productive lives. They didn't live as long as I did, but my father's father lived to the 90s, and his mother, 3 of my 4 grandparents lived into the 90s. But the thing is, my father was a smoker. So he died of a heart attack at 64, age 64. And his older brother died earlier in the 60s. You see, they had good inheritance. They just blew it.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. If you all didn't know, Dr. Smith is maybe a little older than he appears, and is doing fabulous in his age. And it's been wonderful having you here today. And I want to just ask the audience to join me in thanking you.
Thank you, Scott.
And it's been a pleasure having you here in Fargo, and we're just grateful you're here. So please join me in